Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, it gives me particularly great pleasure to be able to introduce Matylda Ciołkosz today to all of you. Matylda, of course, is a well-known actor, contributor to yoga studies, and has done so for many years. She's assistant professor at the Institute of Religious Studies at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, where we first met Matylda. I think it was the first yoga studies conference, I think, that you helped organize back then. Matylda has long brought her own interpretations, her own interests and lenses to the study of yoga. She, in her PhD, looked at movement and philosophy and Vinyasa, Iyengar yoga, and Ashtanga yoga. And she continued to develop her interest in those aspects. And she is now beginning to move towards a more cognitive evolutionary approaches to the study of yoga, and sort of sees how philosophical interests and sort of physical movement issues are brought together in the practice of yoga. So in some ways very contemporary, but also looking at language, looking at cognitive issues, and very, very interesting work for those of you who are not familiar with her studies. Today, she will be looking at a slightly different area. She will be looking at the concept of lineage, or the lack of lineage, should we say, that is beginning to emerge in Iyengar yoga communities, drawing on contemporary data, I understand. So I'm very, very interesting to see how this very, very modern, and some would say very controversial development is beginning to shape how the Iyengar community practices and transmits yoga. So without further ado, Matylda, I'd like you to kick off to share with us your recent finding on that really, really interesting topic. So I'm happy to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Uli, for this generous introduction, and thank you very much, Jackie, for the invitation to this webinar. And yeah, thank you to everybody who's listening on, who's watching. So yes, today I will be talking and I'll be sharing with you some observations and some reflections related to something that was actually so far has been a very small and exploratory study. And as Ulrich noted, I'm very much interested in cognitive evolutionary approaches generally to the study of religion, mostly what are called enactive approaches to the study of religion, but I'm also very much interested in cognitive evolutionary and enactive accounts of morality and values. And with issues such as values come also issues such as authority, such as the autonomy and community also, actually, which I brought into this slightly changed topic of this talk, so that what you see on the slide is slightly different than what you see in the title of the webinar. And of course, the reasons for that is that, as it very often happens, in our scholarly ways, when we agree to contribute to something, then we have a few months to prepare and we kind of develop our thoughts more. So the topic is the title is slightly different. The topic is basically going to remain the same. So yeah, I will be talking about my experiences from conversing with a bunch of former Iyengar yoga practitioners, and this little study, as I said, is an exploratory study with a very small group of people, was kind of inspired by two factors. One factor is the emergence of the theme of the concept of post-lineage yoga, which was proposed by Theo Wildcraft now 5 years ago, with the publication of her book Post-Lineage Yoga from Guru to Me Too. And Theo defines post-lineage yoga as subcultures of yoga practice in which teachers and practitioners that have rejected or been ostracized from the lineage of study come together in peer-to-peer networks to evolve and share yoga practice with others who maintain allegiance to a lineage but look beyond it as a sole authority to determine practice. So what I think is very great about Theo's work, that she notices that there's more, to yoga milieus, to yoga communities than what the official, lineages kind of, dictate or suggest that we see. And there is also some kind of, like social structure to these groups. And Theo herself studied one particular subculture of British practitioners, like loosely organized around a cycle of yoga festivals in the UK. And that brought, many questions, like, what about other categories of post-lineage practitioners? And, generally, depending on what lineage you kind of disaffiliate from, what your previous experience of yoga was, what your actual, personal traits might be, what your, social affiliation outside of yoga may be, what your nationality is, what the general, landscape of yoga practice in your country is, that might, all of this will definitely, influence of how, let's say, you go post lineage. So I would assume that, this is of course and Theo herself, this, suggests that we are talking about subcultures, plural. So we can expect many, different ways to go post lineage, so to say. And I thought, this would be it would be very interesting to study those. I think, Theo's book is a great opening to just starting conversations about different post lineage communities. And well, here comes also my personal interest, because I happen to be a former Iyengar yoga practitioner who now can actually identify as a post-lineage practitioner, because I decided to not maintain an official, affiliation, but I still remain a practitioner of yoga or yoga-related practices. And, my own road to disaffiliating was long and full of reflections and few experiences. And I decided to talk to people like myself, to former Iyengar yoga practitioners who also decided to, cease the formal affiliation with Iyengar yoga, but not start an affiliation with another lineage, but rather they realized that actually they do not need do not want the legitimization of a lineage and the kind of, whatever, belonging to a particular lineage means. So yeah, I will tell you about my, my interlocutors, the people I spoke to later on. And then comes the second motivation for my little study, and this is that, as I said before, I'm very much interested in the question of morality, moral values, and with these come also reflections on the issues of authority, and with it come reflections on the issues of authority in Iyengar yoga, which of course have been brought to more public, reflection in recent years, ever since, the Me Too movement also bore impact on modern yoga and modern posture yoga. This is my dog Durga, who will accompany us today. Anyway, so please sit down. So I became very interested in, I started reflecting on how, how authority works in Iyengar yoga. And had certain, preliminary, general reflections, on the one hand, and there is something very interesting about Iyengar yoga practice. On the one hand, usually instructors in Iyengar yoga empower practitioners to gain control over their bodies and over their movement. And very often for beginner beginner practitioners, this is a very important factor that makes Iyengar yoga attractive, because you learn to, take your body back and take control over it. But on the other hand, instructors do have a lot of authority over the practitioner's movement, their bodies, their embodied experience, even sometimes over their physiology. So there's this very weird kind of dialectic between these two experiences related to Iyengar yoga practice. And it turned out that it wasn't really intentional, but it turned out that through talking with my interlocutors, together we kind of brought forth these exact issues, this weird dialectic of, being, in control of your body and kind of, ceding or outsourcing the control over your body to instructors. Generally the questions that I want to be asking in this regard is, how far does the authority of a yoga instructor reach? What legitimizes it? How much authority should a person instructing others how to move mindfully be credited with? And here maybe also a little asterisk. So I will be talking about instructors, yoga instructors, Iyengar yoga instructors. And a long time ago already, I decided to use this term to talk about people, who instruct others in yoga practice, rather than using the emic, let's say, term teacher that is used in many different milieus. Of course, in Iyengar yoga, in the Iyengar yoga milieu, the emic term is also teacher. You talk about teachers and students. Both, I believe, are very loaded terms that bring forth the idea of, school and the kind of hierarchical relationship between a student and a teacher. So I decided to use kind of a more neutral term of instructor and practitioner. And this is what I'll be doing throughout this talk, unless I'm quoting somebody else who uses the term teacher. Just a quick overview. I'm sure many of the people who are listening on are very well familiar with Iyengar yoga and Iyengar yoga practice, but I will overview it for those who are not aware or not familiar with it, or just also to kind of give a structure to this entire discussion. So mostly Iyengar yoga is about asana practice, with some pranayama practice on a more advanced level, which pranayama practice is also usually preceded by asana practice. And asanas are arranged creatively into sequences based on certain rules of orthopraxy that I will discuss separately. And when I say that they are arranged creatively, I mean that there are no fixed sequences of asana, such as, for example, in Ashtanga yoga, formerly in the tradition of K. Patabi Joyce, but rather, instructors or practitioners can arrange their own sequences, depending on many factors. Postures are performed relatively slowly, and great attention to detail is given. And actually, the performance of a posture involves almost continuous adjustments and micro adjustments. And even if the posture is no longer adjusted in terms of, movement, still there's what's going also on is very acute observation of what's going in the body during the posture. So this very acute adjustments and observation of movement and observation of how the body feels is supposed to result in what may be called enhanced proprioception. So an enhanced capacity to feel your body, the position of your body, and the movement of your body in detail. During group practice, instructors detail verbal cues, guide practitioners, movement, and proprioception. So actually, practitioners are not only told how they should move, how they should kind of tweak their postures through different adjustments. They're also told what to feel. They are given suggestions about feeling different parts of the body, sometimes even their internal organs. And also a very important part of Iyengar yoga practice are manual adjustments. This is, of course, an issue that's been discussed extensively over the past 5 years due to discussion of the relation between manual adjustments and sexual, but also non-sexual physical abuse. But still, not maybe despite, but amidst this discussion, manual adjustments, are an important aspect of the practice. The next, I want to return. So I mentioned, the rules of Iyengar Yoga orthopraxy. I mentioned, I didn't explain yet that they're pretty ambiguous and a little bit vague, I would say. Because on the one hand, through prolonged practice, practitioners are expected to gain, let's say, virtuosity in proprioception. They're expected to understand their body very well, the movement of the body, and feel their body very well. So there's this idea that this virtuosity in proprioception grants practitioners the skill to know what is the right alignment, what is the wrong alignment. So it's supposed to be kind of experience-based. But on the other hand, and also actually a very important aspect of Iyengar yoga practice on an advanced level, and this is almost like a quote from B.K.S. Iyengar, the founder of Iyengar Yoga. So the very important aspects of Iyengar yoga practice would be innovation and improvisation. So the idea that your skill in understanding the mode of movement makes you be creative with an asana. Each time you practice an asana, you perform it differently. You perform it anew. You perform it the way you've never performed it before. You practice it the way you've never practiced it before. And you're supposed to discover, to improvise, to find new things about asana and about your body. But on the other hand, the limits of what one should feel and what one should ask are quite strictly demarcated. So it's not like anything goes. And in fact, from very early on, as a Iyengar yoga practitioner, you're kind of given a map of your body and the map of the limitations of how your body can move. And this map, to continue with this metaphor, has its trails, has its particular routes. And what you really do when practicing, you kind of learn to read this map and to follow this map. You don't really wander off freely. And this means also that the practice is actually pretty conservative, and the innovations that are supposed to be at the core of this method are usually quite slow to come, and also when they are introduced, they are very often very minor tweaks. In a sense, like, for example, you might have a new therapeutic variation of the same asana that's achieved by just like moving, for example, one prop just a little bit into a different direction, or you might simply find a new way of crossing your fingers in a pose, or maybe there might be a new way of describing the same movement. Like, for example, the one example that always comes to my mind is one senior instructor at some point at this workshop has instructed the group that I was a part of to move the horseshoe between their toes. And this horseshoe would be this kind of, U-shaped flap of skin that you have between your toes. And this was like very innovative. That instead of moving, extending your toe, you extend the horseshoe between your toes, which makes the asana a completely new asana, which makes it a completely new experience. So as you see, these are just very non-revolutionary changes. And the interesting thing is that because, the ability to feel the difference between the old way and the new way of performing a pose are a sign of, advancement in practice. So it's very difficult to kind of question this innovation, because if you are a very experienced practitioner, you're probably not going to say, I don't feel any difference, this is all the same, So in this respect, I would say that very often, my observation is that Iyengar yoga is very often pretty conservative, actually very conservative, I would say, in regards to asana practice, but it does conceal this conservativeness by appealing to these really very minor, very minuscule changes in practice that are interpreted as tremendous innovations. Another matter related to Iyengar yoga is how authority is enacted. So I would say that traditionally, at least, the structure of the Iyengar yoga community is hierarchical, and the hierarchy is enacted through different levels of instructor or teacher certification. And I must admit that this is something that, so this hierarchy has been flattened, at least in theory, has been flattened immensely around 2020. So until then, there used to be 13 different degrees of certification. Right now, there are only 5 degrees of certification. And actually, I know the idea behind doing this was actually to kind of make the relationships, well, to decrease bureaucracy, decrease kind of the automatism of the certification process, to make it kind of more interpersonal, but also to flatten this, vast hierarchy. It's still, I would say that, as I said, the flattening definitely would be something that's in process rather than something that happened at the snap of the fingers. Of course, at the top of the entire lineage, we have B.K.S. Iyengar, who passed away in 2014, and I would argue he's a charismatic leader of the movement. Of course, he's very often, as other leaders of yoga movements also are, called the Guruji, Mr. Guru. And I would say that his authority is a resultant of 3 factors. So on the first glance, of course, the argument is that B.K.S. Iyengar was a very skilled yogi, very, proficient yogi, but also, the founder of the method, the founder of the lineage, a very ingenious person who came up with this very kind of complex and systematic system of yoga practice. But I believe that beyond what's being said, there are certain implicit factors, such as, generally the association of authority and of charisma to a person who's given the status of a guru. And here we might actually look into, the traditional understanding of a guru in traditional Indian systems. Of course, the position of Iyengar as a guru is definitely not as strong because nobody, ascribes to him divine status. But I believe, that his, charisma as an Indian yoga teacher was definitely a factor. And also, there's this general tendency to attribute unique spiritual wisdom to persons of Indian descent that I think also contributes to Iyengar's status. So this is something that I think it was Keshub Chandra Sen who called it the yoga faculty. So there's this kind of this Orientalist construct that was employed by both people in India and by both Westerners to kind of interpret the special status of an Indian spiritual teacher, so to say. And I would say that also the fact that we do have a tendency to grant special status to celebrities, to famous people, especially to famous people with special skills, definitely contributes to this special position of B.K.S. Iyengar. And I would also say that Iyengar's charisma is contagious. So here I'm referring to some notions of Jesper Sørensen who propose that in terms of, power, charisma. Very often we understood it in terms of an essence of a person, which we can think about also as a physical substance. And this physical substance can kind of be, transmitted from one person to another. Which means, of course, that the closer you are to a charismatic person, the more this charisma also rubs off on you. And my observation is that this is something that definitely does happen within Iyengar Yoga, with Iyengar Yoga, instructors. The persons who have practiced with Iyengar personally, have known him, who have spent time with him, are attributed with the most authority, also within the lineage. So, on even if it wasn't a contact with Iyengar himself, then of course, with his contact with his direct disciples will definitely grant you, esteem and authority. Being an common, visitor at the Ramamani Iyengar Memorial Yoga Institute in Pune, in Maharashtra, in India, also will kind of get you closer to this charismatic authority. So I think this is also a very important factor in understanding how Iyengar, his direct, descendants and other Iyengar Yoga instructors may acquire special authority, that it's not just the result of their being, proficient yoga practitioners and yoga instructors. This is actually an idea that of this, rubbing off of the charisma. This idea was proposed by Amanda Lucia as haptic logics of proxemic desire. So basically the idea that the closer you are to a guru, right, to a charismatic person, the more, power, the more grace of this guru you may actually acquire. And of course, it's important that during practice, authority is enacted as control of the practitioner's movement. That can happen on the one hand that can happen generally via the instructor's verbal guidance that I've mentioned before, via the manual adjustments. And interestingly, although, as I said, on the one hand, practitioners are encouraged to, gain a lot of autonomy over and control over their own body, they do very often look for legitimization of their experience with the instructors, to kind of, make sure that this is how they were supposed to move, if this is what they're supposed to feel. So this sense of authority is very often enacted during practice, very often enacted in, advising adjustments, in demanding adjustments, in telling right and wrong apart. And I would say that, interestingly, practitioners' coordination of their imported experience is partially outsourced to the instructors. And it's also one of these illustrations of this fact is that very often practitioners find it is not very easy to begin to practice without an instructor. The beginnings are usually very hard because during practice one does not simply get a set of instructions that they can repeat at home, but these instructions are enacted by the instructor, they are guided by the instructor. And I would say it takes, and this is my personal experience, but also experience of other practitioners that I've met over the years, that it takes a lot to build up the autonomy once you start practicing on your own. So this is, yes, just a general summary of certain topics that turned out to kind of emerge to when I started talking about Iyengar Yoga with the group of respondents of mine. So I've talked to a small group of people who are former Iyengar Yoga practitioners and instructors that have all taught classes in the past. The entire group is non-religious, skeptic, and very pragmatic, and I would call them movement enthusiasts in the sense that they have been involved with other forms of movement practice before, during, and after their affiliation with Iyengar yoga. And these would be other forms of postural yoga practice, but also, different kinds of forms of dance, such as contemporary dance, contact improvisation, dance theater, martial arts, such as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, for example, bouldering, which is a form of climbing, resistance training, like weight training, and also other forms of movement exploration, such as the Feldenkrais method, axis syllabus, and other those forms of movement explorations practice, so to say. So I wouldn't say these persons were proper athletes, but rather, as I said, movement enthusiasts, people who kind of explore movement from very different perspective, both kind of, athletic, artistic, yogic, and everything in between. And I say so this group I would not call it culture, especially as this is a very loosely structured group. I will explain that in a moment, but rather a category of practitioners with similar worldviews, similar beliefs, similar interpretations also, as it will turn out, of Iyengar yoga. And despite these similarities, I also have to make a note that it was quite incidental. It was not planned. I was just looking for people who disaffiliated, and it so happened that I found quite similar people. Also, they called themselves, one of the persons called himself an outlier. So these are not dissenters, not people who broke radically with the method, with the lineage, but rather who kind of moved to the margin, or kind of moved beyond the margin, but didn't, let's say, throw the baby out with the bathwater, and both remain in good relations, usually with most of their local Iyengar yoga communities, and some even keep open the options of returning, of coming back. Yet still they're very critical of Iyengar yoga, very reflective and critical about Iyengar yoga, which I will illustrate in a moment. So it was a small group, as I said, 3 people. And strangely, 3 of these people were from the US, 3 are Polish, 5 women and 1 man, aged from early 30s to early 60s. So the 3 US citizens this is kind of a snowball sample, because I've met 2 of them earlier briefly, and the third person, and they all kind of belong to a common network of post-lineage practitioners that kind of meet up online. So this is not a very close group of people, but people who do practice, do meet sometimes together, do meet regularly actually together for practice online. The 3 people from Poland did not know one another at all. Actually, from different parts of the country, or had been part of the Polish Iyengar Yoga Society in Poland in the past, but this was the only thing they had in common. All had been committed to the Iyengar yoga practice between 10 and 30 years before disaffiliating. Most began practicing amongst a crisis, and found Iyengar yoga very helpful in resolving the crisis. And also they found Iyengar yoga they were very enthusiastic in the first place. And to quote one of my respondents, Jyoti, she said that she fell hard for it. And it was basically for all these persons, they fell hard for Iyengar yoga in the first place. 4 of them became certified Iyengar yoga instructors or teachers. 2 began the process of certification. So the 2 people who began the process, that they began the process late, already after the 2020, after the changes related to the flattening of the structure. But they left before completion. Actually, no, this is wrong. It should be 3 and 3. 3 people, or 3 persons left during the certification process, and 3 had been certified Iyengar yoga instructors for a long time. 2 oldest ones, disaffiliated between 2014 and 2014, and the other remaining 4 between 2021. And actually, this was also, yeah, I should have corrected this, between 2021 and actually 2024. So for some people, the disaffiliation was very late, and actually, yeah. But anyways, we can see some of them disaffiliated a few years before the big discussion about abuse in Iyengar yoga surfaced around 2019, and the rest disaffiliated a few years after, which is sort of related to the fact that the issues of sexual abuse did not have a direct bearing on my respondents' decisions to disaffiliate. I mean, all of my respondents acknowledged verbal and physical abuse on part of B.K.S. Iyengar. 2 of the persons expressed relief that B.K.S. Iyengar was not sexually abusive towards practitioners. 1 person was kind of ironic, so kind of sarcastic about, like, thank God he wasn't. It's great that it wasn't, a sexual abuser, but yeah, so no direct, like, actually, so 1 person, testified that she had seen B.K.S. Iyengar abuse other people physically and verbally. She never experienced that herself. 1 other person had a very close person to them be a victim of sexual abuse, actually, on part of another Iyengar yoga instructor in the past, like a long time ago. But at that time, he was dissuaded from disaffiliating, and only disaffiliated much later after a long reflection because of many other factors. But I would like to notice that although, issues of abuse, both physical, verbal, and sexual, in Iyengar yoga did not have a direct bearing on the my interlocutor's decision. It just doesn't mean that they remained indifferent to this issue, or that it didn't influence their decision-making process indirectly, because their decisions to disaffiliate were very largely motivated by the reflection on and critique of authority and instructor-practitioners relationships in Iyengar yoga, and abuse is definitely a part of it, of this broad systemic issue related to authority and these relationships. So I would like to keep that in mind, that this is by no means indifference. This is just not a direct causal relation. So what made my respondents disaffiliate? So one of the reasons, I actually grouped this issue into 6 different categories. One of the reasons is that they felt very overwhelmed by the high demand that being Iyengar yoga, mostly Iyengar yoga instructors, put on them, or has put on them for years. 1 person, so for some people, it was just the idea that they, are given so much knowledge, so much know-how, so much practice, that they don't have time to pause and think for themselves. It's kind of, a whirlwind experience. So they needed to stop and revisit, what they've experienced on their own terms. Also, 2 persons, the 2 more, let's say, junior persons who have been going through the first level of certification, they just started to experience a conflict between their commitment to Iyengar yoga and their personal needs and their family needs also. They felt they needed to more to attend to their families and some family issues, rather than being just, committed fully to Iyengar yoga. And especially for 1 person, it was an experience of really being overwhelmed with assisting during Iyengar yoga classes, teaching Iyengar yoga classes, having to do your own Iyengar yoga practice, and actually having a full-time job and having a child. That was just too much. Another experience was the experience of limitation. And this limitation had different aspects, related with mostly the kind of, conservative nature of the practice, of not being allowed as an instructor to, mix different methods of practice or mix different elements into Iyengar yoga practice. The boredom sometimes with having to do the process in the same way all the time, kind of realizing that there's limitation on the exploration of movement that these persons were looking for. And so they were feeling limited both as practitioners and as instructors. Another factor was frustration with arbitrary rules. What my respondents saw as arbitrary rules of Iyengar yoga orthopraxy. And very often the frustration had to do with lack of empirical grounding, lack of scientific grounding. And sometimes, they felt that the rules are arbitrary. Also, they didn't feel they have the authority and they have the knowledge to really enforce these rules during practice. This would, for example, be related to the rules of menstrual practice during Iyengar yoga, to the rules of, therapeutic practice. They felt that arbitrarily, not empirically based, and not really reflecting their own knowledge and know-how these rules are. Said Yoda. Anyway, so another factor was frustration with the hierarchical structure of Iyengar yoga. One of my responders, Jyoti, she said that for first it felt to her that ultimately it felt to her that Iyengar yoga had become a religion. B.K.S Iyengar, who used to be called Mr. Iyengar, became Guruji out of the sudden, and the more hierarchical structure sort of set in. And so Jyoti, this respondent, she was also frustrated with the communicative style between practitioners and instructors that seemed to reflect this hierarchy, like the fact that the instructors had power over the practitioners. Another of my respondents felt that she was being treated in patronizing ways, that she was expecting to her, mentor to be more of her peer, but he was more, patronizing to her, which was frustrating. Yeah, and other respondents also expressed similar concern. And all of this also came with a newly found feeling of autonomy. So practically all my respondents at some point started feeling that they don't really need the legitimization of the group, the legitimization of the lineage, the legitimization of this, validation of the Iyengar yoga certificate, and just felt they can pursue their experience as yoga practitioners, as yoga instructors independently now. And finally, some considerations were very pragmatic, like related to the fact that, affiliation is, and for example, the certification process is very costly, it's very time consuming, that the practitioners also who practice with them as instructors do not really need advanced complex Iyengar yoga practice. That they're very often, some of these practitioners would be athletes, other would be psychiatric patients, other would be just, overworked neighborhood young women and young mothers who just needed any kind of, kind of regular movement practice. So for them, sticking to the Iyengar yoga method and to the, rules of Iyengar yoga practices were really not useful and not necessary. So those were, the reasons for departure. But as I said, all the practitioners remain, as I said, they did not throw the baby out with the bathwater. They still remain aware of the fortes of the strong suits of Iyengar yoga. They are show respect and gratitude, usually, most of them, to their, community, to their previous instructors. They also keep really good relations, as I said, usually, actually always, they keep good relations or proper relations with the community. They kind of, try to follow this community. They're open to, doing workshops together, to meeting during different, in different social situations. As I said, a couple actually keep open the option of returning someday if, fortuitous, so to say, circumstances arise. Not that they plan of it, but they don't say no to it if, things happen that way. And also they all agree that Iyengar Yoga is a good foundation of practice. They say it's good for the beginners. It gives beginners the structure. It gives beginners the, the kind of the way that this, precise arrangement of Iyengar Yoga practice, this kind of, meticulousness and this attention to detail, they all say it's really good to start with. If you have a person who's never practiced Iyengar Yoga before, never had a much movement practice before, this is a great way to kind of, have them start exploring movement. And they do acknowledge that at a certain point, Iyengar Yoga was good for them. And this is once again a quote from Jyoti, one of the respondents. I don't regret any of it because I wouldn't be who I am. I don't regret I learned a lot, even if it meant things I eventually unlearned. It still meant learning, so I was inspired, and then I was disillusioned. So that's the pattern usually, inspiration, commitment, involvement, but then, gradual disillusionment and disaffiliation. And I also asked more specifically my respondents what they like about Iyengar Yoga, what they appreciate, what they think the strong suits of Iyengar Yoga are. And first and foremost, they said they were anonymous in terms of quoting props, the famous Iyengar Yoga, belts, bolsters, blankets, stresslers, blocks, and other equipment, which they thought, really are very useful in, first and foremost, facilitating the practice for beginners, for making you experience the practice in a comprehensive way, make you understand certain, alignments of the body better. So nobody dissed the props. Everybody thought that the props were great. And also they appreciated the systematic, methodical, and precise nature of the practice. Also, on many levels, it concerned not only, the asana sequences, and I mean, not only the actually asana practice as itself, as in, attending to details, micro adjustments, etc., but also the fact that you have course syllabi, that you have very clear guidelines as to how to teach a beginner practitioner, how to guide a beginner practitioner. They all appreciated that. And also they liked the fact that this is an accessible practice, that for beginner practitioners, so one of the persons, Sami, said, that you get those through these particular adjustments in positions, you give people access points to the movements, access points to the postures. But the funny thing is that when I asked the practitioners what they dislike about Iyengar Yoga, and what the worst parts of Iyengar Yoga are, they said basically it's the same thing. And one person, Jinx, she said just plainly, as that, it's going to be the same thing. And then she started explaining. Another respondent, Rita, she said, these same things become a trap at some point, an obstacle on the road. At some point, this becomes stiffening. So generally, it turns out what is initially appealing about Iyengar Yoga, the systematicity, the structure, the alignment, the meticulousness becomes ultimately limiting. And I would say that, the entire group at first were attracted to the sense of order, to the sense of structure in Iyengar Yoga, but in time they realized the limitation result from it resulting from it become make them lack flexibility, make them lack autonomy as practitioners and as instructors. And most specifically, but there are also more specific concerns about Iyengar yoga practice and also social structure. I'm realizing that I realized I have been talking for a long time. I will try to finish really soon, so there's enough time to answer questions. So the one of the persons, Jyoti, she used the phrase the nocebo effect. Milo, he called it fear-mongering, and Sami called it the old science of can't do this because that's going to break that. So the fact that practitioners, they said, are kind of become fearful of movement because of the strict rules of orthopraxy that come with, if you don't do it the orthoprax way, if you don't do it the right way, you're going to injure yourself. If not immediately, then, after a longer time, you're going to kind of, accumulate injuries. And this fear of, movement became a great obstacle for my respondents. Sami also noted an interesting phenomenon that very often, if practitioners do have certain issues, they kind of become part of their identity, and their entire practice is focused, rather than on overcoming those issues and making them better, very often becomes focused on this issue. So, you come with a bad shoulder, and this entire practice over, weeks, months, years becomes about their bad shoulder. Also, more general taking away of the practitioner's autonomy through what one person called micromanagement. Another person talked about the omnipotence of instructors who think they can simply, control the practitioners and the movement, and who try to just exert this control rather than just, letting the practitioners be and experience on their own. And also faulty hierarchical interpersonal relations that they found patronizing. They found the communicative style, between instructors and practitioners problematic. And as I mentioned before, unsupported quasi-medical claims were problematic to most of the group. How one person mentioned that, for example, such what are in fact arbitrary rules, for example, of menstrual practice that are proposed to Iyengar yoga practitioners. Other person was frustrated by so-called depression sequences, or the idea that there are sequences of certain postures assigned for particular ailments, and it is claimed that they have therapeutic effects despite no proper scientific studies. And also one of the respondents mentioned that even though Iyengar yoga instructors do not really have diagnostic competences, they kind of act very often as people who do. And finally, broadly understood dogmatism, where we can kind of, here we can bring in the aforementioned orthopraxy that I've already discussed extensively. So that was a problem for the entire group. And interestingly, one person actually mentioned lack of peer supervision. So this is one of the persons who disaffiliated in 2014/2015. So she has not experienced yet the change in the the flattening of the structure within Iyengar yoga, because since then there's been a move to change really kind of large scale teacher courses into mentoring programs. For small groups of instructors, they are supposed to be based on more kind of peer support rather than on hierarchical relations. However, interestingly, two persons who have experienced, 2 of my respondents who have experienced already this kind of more peer-based mentoring system have also experienced its faults. They also discovered that their mentors were a little patronizing, and they were a little, overprotective and authoritarian in their relations. So once again, although it seems that there is a movement to make the Iyengar yoga communal structure kind of, more egalitarian and more flat, and base it on peer support rather than, on hierarchical authority, it's still definitely a work in progress. Interestingly, I also asked my respondents about B.K.S Iyengar, and here they were also they weren't ambivalent because they were very clear about their feelings, but they were able to admit like what they thought was like really valuable about this person, but they also mentioned and were aware of his his wrongdoings and his flaws. So they acknowledged the fact that he was one person actually called him a rebellious reformer of yoga. Another person appreciated how he overcame his own shortcomings. Another person mentioned how he kind of overcame the cultural limitations of India of his time. But on the other hand, they saw him as a flawed human who was simply abusive. One person simply called him a brute. Another said, so Jyoti said, I had this idea of who B.K.S Iyengar was, and then he ended up to be a man, a person, human, damn. So there was this realization that, this is not a great, charismatic, I mean, this person has certain charisma and he has certain achievements, but on the other hand, he was a bit of a disappointment to some of the people. And definitely they see Iyengar as not a person of an exceptional position. So Jyoti said he was one of the many, many teachers that I've had. He's not my guru. So nobody sees Iyengar as his or her guru. Actually, one person said, Rita said, I won't say that I would not have practiced yoga if it wasn't for Iyengar, because I don't know about Gurudevs. So she also kind of, dispelled this myth of if it wasn't for this person coming into my life, I would have not become a yogi, etc. So they were kind of more, you can see they were kind of also very skeptical and a little bit distanced towards B.K.S Iyengar. And also there were some interesting comparisons. So one person, actually Milo, he compared he compared Iyengar to Leonardo da Vinci because he seemed like such a cool, ingenious inventor in the domain of yoga. He came up with all the, different props, with all the ways of practicing asanas. And two persons compared B.K.S Iyengar to Jesus Christ, but not the way you think. So for one person, and we have to remember we are talking about non-religious people here, right? So one person, she just said, she said like Iyengar is to her like Tirumalai Krishnamacharya or like Jesus Christ, a random historical figure, not somebody who's personally relevant. So somebody that she knows from history. And another person, Jinx, she also said that B.K.S Iyengar is like Jesus, but using kind of the trope of a charlatan, a miracle worker who performs miracles based on the placebo effect. Like, he splashes mud in the blind man's eyes, and the blind man begins to see. So here, likening Iyengar to Jesus was an expression of distrust, basically. Like, this person claims to have powers that they might not really have. Once again, this is a non-religious person speaking. And finally, the relationship between instructor and practitioners, because I asked the group, if not this relationship, this social structure that Iyengar yoga offers, what would your ideal instructor practitioner relationship it is? And interestingly, so when I was speaking, I was always using the term instructor. I wasn't using the term teacher. So a few people picked up on it and they started wondering, okay, if not a teacher, who? How would I call myself as a person instructing in yoga? So they used these terms: sharer, messenger, facilitator, classroom reader, movement specialist. They also noted that the relation has to be egalitarian, that, practitioners and instructors have to be peers, that the autonomy of practitioners should be cultivated. And here Sami used a very interesting metaphor, I think she said that she likes the Socratic method, that teaching in her mind works best when the teacher brings the students to their own conclusions or helps them learn rather than telling them what to think. They also talked about creating a safe space, and safe space not only in terms of not being abusive and not being invasive, but also creating a space when practitioners are not afraid to move and are not afraid to take like little bits of controlled risks, so that they're not, fearful of exploring and experimenting. And also, very interestingly, they said that this relationship should be professional, that they are professionals, and they should, also kind of treat practitioners the way you would treat clients. And this is related to the fact that this relationship should be bounded, both short term. So, for example, it should start when the classes start, it should end when the classes end, but also should be bounded long term. And here comes the title of today's talk that is way too long by now. So this is a quote from Milo, a rephrasing of a famous saying: when the time comes, the teacher disappears. And this can be rephrased by two other quotes from my respondents. Cher said, in each teacher-student report or mentor-student report, everyone ultimately goes their own way. Finally, Sami, I don't want my students to need me. My goal is for them to not need me anymore. My goal for them is for them to be able to solve the problems themselves. So to conclude, as you can see, all the respondents favor autonomy, egalitarianism, pragmatism, and skepticism in their relationships in the yoga classroom, so to say, or in the yoga room. And a general conclusion is that for a category of Iyengar yoga practitioners, leaving the system behind becomes a logical consequence of beginning the practice in the first place. So what's cool, what's really appealing at first becomes an obstacle later on. And the question is, if this kind of, fuse that's built into Iyengar yoga, this fact that you learn to be, so inquisitive and proprioceptive, that the method itself starts to bother you, can it also motivate others to reform Iyengar yoga rather to leave the lineage, and maybe protect them also from a loss of autonomy that has happened very often in Iyengar yoga classrooms. And this is weird. So finally, a reflection on just the general merit of studies such as that, of studying post-lineage groups and post-lineage practitioners. So on the one hand, definitely, such studies can help better understand the dynamics of modern yoga milieus and their approach to authority and community that transcends lineage. But also, I would like to notice that, studies among such groups can help better understand the lineages themselves. Because if we give a voice to people who have left, we can kind of, triangulate and get a fuller, more nuanced interpretation of a lineage's functioning. And I would say that, listening only to loyal lineage members creates a bit of a, it's not exactly a survival bias, but something kind of like it. You only talk to the people who remained, who like, what's happening in the lineage, who are not being, or like it enough to not dissent. So I think it's a very good idea to also see who has, fallen, who has left, and also, have discussions with those persons to get a fuller, broader picture this is it. I'm very sorry for taking so long. I hope we still have enough time for discussion.
Matylda, thank you very much for this wonderful introduction to dissent within the Iyengar community and mapping some of the very complex motivations that underpin those decisions of departure. It must be very difficult decisions. The voices that you brought to us were conflicted voices in many ways, weren't they? How do you go about assessing those different motivating factors? Because some were very personal. You know, you speak about a feeling of overwhelming. Others were very critical of what they had encountered as part of their training. From a research perspective, it must be quite difficult to disentangle those. Or did you not find that difficult?
I mean, here I have to really thank my respondents. I mean, I have to thank them anyway for just, I mean, for everything, for having talked to me, but also the wonderful so they were just all those persons were extremely eager to talk, and they were very pleased to talk, and it was. I never got a sense that it was in any way difficult for any of them. I mean, it was definitely, all of them gave me, so their feedback was that actually they appreciated the talk because it made them reflect. They had the ability to actually think about all these things and kind of bring them into, express them, verbally. So I think it seems to me that the entire group kind of needed to be able to, talk aloud about it, even to themselves. And I think for that reason, they were just very open, and they were very, direct, very casual about it, also very emotional. These were just fantastic, very empathetic, I would say, interviews. So it was really, kind of disentangling and coding these issues was pretty easy, because there was no holding back, really. They were also pretty long and very verbose, and there was a lot of material.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We have no time for more questions and comments. Jackie, do you want to moderate those questions and comments?
Yes, certainly, Ulrich. So thank you again, Matylda. Wonderful presentation. And we do have a lot of questions. So I'll moderate quickly with a few that I hope you can address quite clearly. There's one from Joe Johnson, which says, did any of your respondents express a responsibility towards making the change from within? Clearly, they all valued the Iyengar practice, but did they feel that there was an option for them to innovate in the way that they may have liked from within the Iyengar fold itself, or did they have to leave in order to be able to do that?
I don't know if they had to leave in order to do that, but they did not at all express any, even, intention to do it from within. I think it seems that deciding to be disaffiliated was their first. Saying first decision is kind of simplifying, because as actually Ulrich noticed, it was a long process of reflection. It happened over years, but none of them indicated they thought about, reform. And actually my hunch is that, this would be different categories of actually practitioners. You have the, outliers, and you will have the reformers. And actually, this is actually a separate group of practitioners that I would like to talk in the future and see the difference between them, because my hunch is that anyway, this group didn't even mention it.
Thank you. In fact, that's quite important. The reformer option would be an interesting elaboration of your study, given the sample was so small.
Sorry, if I may comment quickly, I know, for example, in the Polish Iyengar Yoga community, in Polish, for example, the Society of Iyengar Yoga in Poland, it's now quite a young community, and this is a community of reformers, like from at least so this is definitely an interesting group to study also, because this is, I also see that this reformer movement is quite a big and important movement. So.
Great. So just moving on to a couple more questions. So Laura said, I think a research question that you haven't mentioned and seems relevant to me is why did respondents choose Iyengar yoga initially? The disappointment likely relates to that factor rather than claiming that the system is disappointing.
I mean, I wouldn't say that the system is disappointing. And I think I was intending to actually suggest why they chose Iyengar yoga in the first place, but maybe I didn't articulate it clearly enough. I mean, so, okay, I wouldn't say they chose Iyengar yoga. Iyengar yoga kind of chose them because it seemed that in all their biographies, it was kind of accidental, like not super, determined, I'm going to do exactly this practice. I mean, 3 people have had experience with other forms of yoga. So they kind of did browse first and stayed with Iyengar yoga. But they stayed with Iyengar yoga for the reasons I mentioned. For the fact because it was, it was so structured, it was so encompassing, and it gave them something that, as I said, being movement enthusiasts, being just interested in movement and the, intricacies of movement, they really, fell hard for Iyengar yoga because it gave them that. It gave them a really intricate, complex, and encompassing movement experience. And it was so ordered and it was so structured. And also, as I said, some of them were going through crisis and in their lives. So this kind of, systematic and structured character of Iyengar yoga is what drew them in and is what kept them, interested for a long time. And as I said, this is, so at first, this exactly, quality of Iyengar yoga being structured, being precise, being encompassing, being all about, observing and exploring movement is what drew them in and what later, made them disillusioned.
Thanks. There's a few more questions, so we'll move along quite quickly. The next is from Ruth Westerby. So she says, thanks for the presentation, Matylda. The point about the precision of teaching leading to fear of movement is fascinating. Do you think the general findings on Iyengar yoga are generalizable to other traditions? I'm thinking that there's lots of similarity between the Ashtanga vinyasa system, for example.
That's interesting. Ruth, I would like to talk more about it because, I mean, my hunch was, but here Ruth has much more experience with Ashtanga yoga than I do have. In comparison, I would think that Ashtangis are slightly less, more adventurous in this regard. My hunch was that very often you kind of understand that you might get a contusion as a result of the practice, and you kind of accept that, like you do when you're an athlete. And it seems to me that in Iyengar yoga, there's this idea that if you really do things properly, you will not hurt yourself. And I do have to that based on my long observation. I've seen that very often, that there's this kind of avoidance of something that's not normative because it might hurt you. And also, interestingly, what I've noticed with Iyengar yoga, that I've heard many testimonials of people who have injured themselves, but they would say this is because of something else. This is because I ran too long, or I said wrong, or I sneezed wrong. It was very difficult to admit that somebody might have a contusion because of Iyengar yoga, because if you do Iyengar yoga good, you will not hurt yourself, right? So it's a complex issue in itself, and I think it merits a longer discussion.
Thanks, Matylda. Yes, indeed. I think that point that you made about the fear response, it'd be interesting to see how that relates to individuals' response to authority versus fear response within the pedagogy itself. So I'm wondering whether these particular individuals that you classify as sort of dissenters, what their relationship to fear is, because that may indicate one of their reasons for leaving, if you know what I mean, that relationship rather than their relationship with the system itself.
Sorry, Jackie, I think my connection got kind of wonky and we were breaking up. So you were talking about the relationship between my respondents and fear, right?
Indeed, yes. I wondered whether there was a way of assessing that, whether the individuals themselves, you know, their personal past or characteristics or relationship with trauma and so forth, whether that their relationship with fear actually is a driving force of one of their reasons for leaving. But anyway, that's just in my opinion. There might be something in there. But anyway, we have lots of questions.
Point, if I may just comment, I agree with you that this is related also to certain, you know, personal traits. I don't want to talk longer because we want to, you know, maybe we can discuss it also on some other occasion. But yeah, I agree with you.
Indeed. We have lots of other questions. So there's an anonymous attendee. B.K.S. Iyengar lived through colonial India. Like many people in India, he was impacted by European culture. Can you elaborate on how this context may have influenced European interpretation of B.K.S. Iyengar and Iyengar yoga?
The influence of European culture. I don't know if I can do it in a concise way because this is a big topic, and I think I would have to give it a longer thought. I mean, I think this is generally you know, the interesting theme of modern yoga, you know, founders, teachers who react also to, well, of course, on the one hand, being kind of brought up in this, you know, let's say dual culture that's both, that's Indian colonial and kind of, you know, post-colonial later on. I mean, I think I was old already then, but I think probably I would say that some great reflections on that might be found in Mark Singleton's book Yoga Body, and I would agree with a lot of what he proposes about this. You know, for example, how the teaching environment might have looked actually, you know, in the late colonial India. The other question would be, you know, what happened around Europeans coming to India and Indians coming to Europe, you know, after, let's say, let me simplify it, you know, borders opened up and, you know, like, you know, migrating was kind of a more common thing. There's also another factor that has to be discussed, right? Okay, how did the Westerners receive people like B.K.S. Iyengar, and how, you know, what the power dynamics between an Indian person and the Westerners might be. But yeah, I think it's a very big topic, and at this moment I don't feel competent to discuss it. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. There's other questions. I'll just skip ahead to one that should be fairly easy to answer, and it is, did any of the people involved leave the method due to injury?
No. I mean, one person, not directly. I mean, one person had an experience with a lingering injury. So it wasn't the reason to leave, but it was one of there was a reason to reflect. So so the story was that this person had an injury evidently acquired during Iyengar yoga practice, and she tried to use Iyengar yoga to heal this injury. And she tried, and she tried, and she did this variation and that variation, and it didn't work. And so ultimately she sought help with the physiotherapist. And she started going to physiotherapy, and she got a kettlebell, and she was told to like do a squat or something, you know, a split squat or something like that. And it turned out that that an injury that lingered for months, I think, like was gone very quickly. And then she had this reflection that, oh my God, Iyengar yoga is not, I'm going to quote her now, a total method. So it doesn't really require, give you solutions for everything. And that also made her realize that sometimes Iyengar yoga might feel like overcomplicated. That maybe you don't need 3 belts and this particular two blankets, a bolster, and this particular variation of a pose. Maybe you just need to squat with a little weight in your hand. So this was the indirect inspiration that an injury provided, but it wasn't just like, okay, I mean I know of people who left because of an injury. But these people who have left, who I know have left because of injury, were kind of more. They were never that committed. Like somebody who started doing Iyengar yoga practice, then they, did something to their knee and decided it's not for them. But in this group, as I said, one person, and it wasn't a direct reason.
Okay, back to another question from Ruth Westerby, who says, drawing on some of Suzanne Newcomb's work on the collaborations involved in authoring Iyengar's books and the institutionalization of Iyengar yoga, to what extent should we be talking about Iyengar yoga as a style and institution and not synonymous with B.K.S. Iyengar himself?
This is also a huge question. I think that at this point, I would really have to talk much more to people in the Iyengar yoga community and actually, with kind of, have more insight into how, for example, the reforms within Iyengar yoga are going, because I think now there's a very interesting transitional period. And I'm sure there's also the same, with Ashtanga yoga, of course. So with Iyengar yoga, so there's this process, right? B.K.S. Iyengar passed away. Then his daughter Gita Iyengar passed away. Then the, sexual abuse themes came up with the cases, against Manus Humanos. And so there became these different factors in which I think authority kind of was, gone because people passed away. On the other hand, there was a realization that there might be something off with this kind of authority. And I do know that the community talks about it, and different local communities also talk about it differently. So the question is, to what extent this system will kind of move away from B.K.S. Iyengar. From what I see right now, B.K.S. Iyengar still becomes a very important symbolic figure, and it's always about him, and it's always going back to him for authority, for legitimization. But it will be, I think, interesting to see to what extent, gradually his role and, the idea of a lineage might become maybe less important, and other forms of, communal glue, so to say, right, will hold this group together. But this is to be seen, I think.
Thanks. This is just a comment from Victoria saying, thank you very much. There also seems to be an issue with those quitting after having made a name for themselves. I mean, being known as an Iyengar instructor and then going out and doing something the same, but I guess under their name. So I think this is also an important topic of research on who quits yoga as a discipline. Many people are going to yoga to go on to other kinds of disciplines and other kinds of training. So it was just a statement, not necessarily a question. From Natalia, does female and male experience differ in your conversation?
So in this particular group, it not, I mean, as I said, the group was had a bias towards female respondents. There was 1 man and 5 women. In this particular group, gender wasn't really relevant. But as I said, this is a small group and only with 1 man. So I would have to, I would need a much larger sample to see whether gender matters. Yeah.
Thank you. An anonymous attendee, did you personally study with the Iyengars directly, and if so, for how long?
I did not study. Well, I did not even see Iyengar physically ever. The first time I went to Pune was after his death already. I have participated in these more, large-scale workshops. Classes with Gita Iyengar, with Abhijata Iyengar, who's the granddaughter of B.K.S. Iyengar, with Prashant Iyengar, who's also the son of B.K.S. Iyengar. But those were those big. So these are those big communal events that are called the Yoga Nushasanam that were held around Iyengar's birthday in December in Pune. So I attended those, and so in this way I've had experience with as I said, Gita and Abhijata and Prashant Iyengar. but no direct, no more direct interaction with them.
Again, there's another question here. Considering the evolving landscape of yoga in Poland, what factors do you think contribute to the growing number of instructors moving away from Iyengar method, and how might this shift affect the way yoga is practiced and perceived in Polish culture?
Once again, this is a question I don't think I'm ready to answer at this point. So I believe probably there are many different factors would have to be taken into consideration here. On the one hand, the fact that there are just more lineages or methods of style of yoga available, and more there's more access to the same variety of yoga practices that you can see, or similar variety that you can see in Western European countries or in the US. I want, based on the people, the Poles that I've talked to are also kind of more interdisciplinary movement wise, right? So the fact, and also it seems very obvious to me that their look at yoga is, their understanding of yoga is kind of inflected through the fact that they have experience with other movement practices. So I think, given that this is just generally the landscape of how you can move, what you can do with with your body, is broader. This might also, I think, influence interpretation of yoga, because once we open up to the idea that we don't have to be so orthoprax, and we can, for example, mix different aspects of movement practices with yoga, it definitely also opens up the possibilities. But as I said, this is not something I've researched systematically, so this is as good as I can do today on the topic.
Yeah, there's lots and lots of comments in the question page, Matylda, so please feel free to read through that when you can. But at the same time, there's a couple of questions, so we'll quickly move to the questions. There's one from Roberta, which said, I'm interested in the restructuring of the certification process. So what was the catalyst? I guess he's talking about this flattening of the certification. He says, I'm not an Iyengar yoga teacher, but I've studied with many Iyengar yoga teachers. So what has been the catalyst? Do you think it has been the death of B.K.S. Iyengar?
I mean, I don't know if it catalyst. It was a process. So that many. So first it was the death of B.K.S. Iyengar, then it was the death of Gita Iyengar, and the fact that we had to restructure also. I guess let's say the hierarchy in Pune. And so it, rather than a catalyst, to my knowledge, it's just a sequence of factors that contributed. And also I know there's been a lot of discussion over the years about how local or Iyengar Yoga organization handle the certification processes, because in the past, that, and also it depends on the country. It differs a little bit from country to country, but very often you would have this really kind of, large scale, very commercial teacher training programs that could be like, in some countries could be really, really large scale. And I know that one of the factors was also wanting to make it, as I said before, more kind of peer-based, more mentoring-based. So there's, kind of quality over so kind of a quality over quantity approach. And that also was related to the idea of flattening of the structures, rather than producing instructors of different levels of certification. To have kind of the experience of gaining experience, of gaining proficiency as a yoga instructor, being kind of less quantifiable, but more, the assessment would be more quality-based rather than quantity-based. This is just one in a nutshell, because once again, there was a long process of decision-making. Also, there was a lot of conflict, by the way, because obviously, if your livelihood depends on holding a large-scale teacher training programs, it might be difficult to change the entire, your entire business model, so to say, right? So, among other things. So there's a lot of discussion.
Great. We are actually over time, but I thought I would just get to one last question, because Preti had her hand up throughout the last part of the questions, and only just put her question in. So, given your own engagement with the practice of Iyengar yoga, how do you keep your research and conclusions non-biased?
I mean, you just have to be, wary of these things. But also, I believe there's there's an interesting aspect of Iyengar yoga that comes in here. And I'm going to go back to what I said earlier about there being this fuse, that by being an Iyengar yoga practitioner, by becoming an Iyengar yoga practitioner, you become a potential ex-Iyengar yoga practitioner, because you kind of learn to be critical and to scrutinize your movements, scrutinize your experience, kind of, observe your experience from the outside, etc., etc. And I found when I started, becoming interesting in yoga as a researcher, that this quality that I've learned by being a Iyengar yoga practitioner became useful in a way. Because in a way, by being an Iyengar yoga practitioner, yeah, you get this. You learn to be reflexive about what's going on, with your body, with your, cognitive processes, whatever. Of course, as I said, there is a certain also orthopraxy to how you do it. There's a certain method, very specific method to how you do it. So you have to be able to kind of disentangle that. But I believe that for me, it made it a little bit easier, that Iyengar yoga itself already taught me to be a little bit like, skeptical and critical of whatever I'm witnessing, but also like, just general, what you learn as a scholar, what you learn as a researcher, kind of, the ability to suspend certain, beliefs and convictions. And also another thing that was very, very helpful for me is that I did a comparative study on Iyengar yoga, Ashtanga yoga, and Vinyasa, which made me also, broaden my experience, and also kind of, triangulate from this perspective, because I learned that you can look at yoga practice, at asana practice, from a very different perspective that these other lineages and methods offer. So this was also, this kind of weird triangulation also helped in kind of being more, reflexive and critical and external towards Iyengar yoga.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Matylda. We are over time. There are lots of questions. There's been really some fascinating comments, particularly by Mike Demathi, who's suggested people go on to read things like Eric Shaw's Seizing the Whip. I know those that need to leave, please do leave. I know we're over time, but there is a couple more questions that I thought we should try and address. One more that says, do you think the shift away from the Iyengar method could be driven by the growing emphasis on individual authenticity and personal interpretations in yoga? And how might this affect broader issues such as narcissism and unhealthy power dynamics in the yoga community? If you could answer that one very briefly, that would be great, and we might finish there. Thank you.
Okay. So this was not the case for my respondents. This idea of I didn't have the feeling that was this kind of notion of individualism and authenticity was a motivation for them. And especially as I didn't feel that for any of these people it was a matter of identity. Let me maybe put it this way. It was kind of more pragmatic about how they felt as, movement practitioners, how they felt about instructors of a movement practice, not about, their kind of, identity being maybe stifled or squashed through being a part of the lineage. So in case of these persons that I've spoken to, I wouldn't say that was a factor. This phenomenon was a factor. So, and I can't really comment broader than that. So yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. It's been a fascinating conversation. It's spurred on a lot of questions, and I think your ongoing research in this area no doubt will have an impact on people who are questioning their lineage themselves, but those that are remaining within the community, that people here, such as Victoria, have stated that shifting to the mentoring system based on several years of interpretations from within, so people are staying within and trying to adapt the system. So thank you very much, Matylda. I know you're writing up your work on this, and we hope to see it published in the coming year. Thank you.
Thank you very much once again for inviting me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for the question, and all the best to everybody.
Yeah. Thank you. And for those that are still here, next event for the Centre of Yoga Studies will be Dr. Ruth Westerby, and so we look forward to you joining us on the 3rd of February for that very important conversation, where she'll be presenting the findings of her doctoral research on Hatha Yoga, the body in Hatha Yoga. So thank you very much, and thank you, Matylda.
Thank you.